Good morning, good afternoon. It is now a few days after COP26 has ended, and across the world, I think the conclusion is that the COP has kept the hope for 1.5 degrees alive. And although the media has talked a lot about the things that did not get realized at this summit, it's important to reflect on the huge progress that we made over the last 2 weeks. I think we can think about that in 2 buckets. First, governments materially increased their ambition. Not sufficiently, but it was an increase. Already coming into the COP, countries pledged higher levels of emission reductions. And then during the 2 weeks, additional pledges and commitments were released. There was a commitment to dramatically reduce methane emissions that over 100 countries signed up to. There was a commitment to halt deforestation around the world that also involved countries like Congo, Brazil, and Indonesia. Significantly, there was discussion about the transition away from fossil fuels in a way that we hadn't seen at any previous climate negotiation. And although the final wording of phase down rather than phase out of coal disappointed some, I will point out that it is really quite significant that the world agreed to start to talk about the end of the fossil fuel era. And maybe the most significant surprise during the COP at the government level was the release of a proclamation by the US and China that they will re-engage in a dialogue around climate change. During the Trump administration, we unfortunately lost that momentum. But I will remind all of you that in the run-up to Paris, the collaboration between the US and China was instrumental for reaching agreement. And it is good to see those 2 countries now coming together again. The second bucket relates to the private sector. The private sector showed up at this climate negotiation at a massive scale. And although they weren't always completely clear yet what their role was going to be, they got in the act with deals, with practical implementation plans, with concrete suggestions of what they could do. The business presence at this COP was clearly much larger than at any COP in history. And it was not just corporates that were there looking for ways to strengthen their business in light of the energy transition. Finance was also present at a very large scale, looking for ways to align their investment portfolios to the 1.5 degree goal and managing the risks associated with climate change. Now, of course, these are all initial pledges, and we have to hold businesses and financial institutions accountable for the delivery, but it was a good start. Here are some very practical examples. At RMI, we were part of an announcement of 45 gigawatts of new green hydrogen installations to be deployed by the middle of this decade. That was significantly higher than we had expected even 6 months ago. Many auto companies signed up to the end of internal combustion engine vehicles, if not by the end of this decade, then at least by the middle of the next decade. And that clearly sets the direction for the transition in passenger vehicles and even in trucking. Rules were agreed for carbon trading, and that is materially important because it allows not just governments, but also businesses and financial institutions to put a price on carbon and to start to understand where their contributions can be made most significantly. So there was good news both on the government front and in the private sector. But not all was good. One area that was disappointing was climate finance. With regret, the developed world recognized that they did not deliver the $100 billion in climate finance that was promised to developing countries as long back as the Copenhagen COP. And although we will now see an increase in mobilization of finance for adaptation in particular, we will need to hold developed countries to account for providing the support for the global south that is so crucially necessary. In that context, a very exciting announcement came from the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, led by Rockefeller Foundation, of which RMI is also a part. The other sensitive subject on the agenda that did not get concluded was the subject of loss and damage. Particularly the most vulnerable countries suffering significantly from the impacts of climate change were not major contributors to the cause of climate change, and they are looking to the developed world for supporting them as they adapt to a new reality. In all, COP26 was a promising event, a promising summit, and yet not sufficient. Promising in the sense that we talked about implementation, we saw business get into the action, we saw opportunities for scaling up ambition. But it was not sufficient that 1.5 degrees as a goal may be alive, but it is still on life support. Thank you.